Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. This is NAMI Eastside's monthly educational forum sponsored by Evergreen Health. We cover lots of different topics in mental health over the course of these different forums. And tonight we're celebrating Pride Month. We have Marisa Mondavé, who has done some research on affirmative mental health care for young adults, LGBTQ and queer identifying young adults. So I'm really, really excited to have her here tonight to chat with you about this topic. With that, Marisa, I'll go ahead and just pass it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'll go ahead and just share some slides I have for you all. So just to give a heads up, I can't see anyone. So if you have any questions at any point, just go ahead and unmute yourself. That would be very helpful. So today we'll be talking about the research I did on affirmative mental health care for young adults, ages 18 to 26. And I want to go ahead and share author acknowledgements to the PI of the study, Dr. Kristen Choi, and also to UCLA for really just supporting the study. I did this during my grad school, so yeah, it's just a little bit of context. So I want to take a moment to just have a moment of mindfulness. So I'll go ahead and play this video for you all, and we can go ahead and
Hey,
take a
Marisa.
moment.
We can't
Yes.
see your slides right now.
Oh, I'm so sorry to
That's
hear
okay,
that.
no worries. Just wanted to make sure before we did our mindfulness.
Oh, yes, that would be very helpful. Okay. Great. Is this better? Okay, awesome. Let me go ahead and thank you for the heads up. That's very helpful. So we'll go ahead and take our mindfulness moment now. I'll go ahead and play that for you all. Thank you guys for joining me into that. All right, so a few more acknowledgements I want to share out. So this study was funded by the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. And for full disclosure, there were no conflicts of interest. And also want to share out artist acknowledgements to a local Seattle artist, Dante Bell, for creating illustrations for our qualitative themes in the study. So we're very thankful and very excited to have those pieces of artwork. So just to have a little bit of full disclosure on what we will be talking about, we will be talking about topics on mental illness, mental health care, and suicide. So if you need to take a moment to step out at any second and take care of yourself, please feel free to do so. And also putting up the 988 line just for your resource. So a quick overview of what we'll be talking about today. So I'll give a little bit of background on mental health and mental illness among LGBTQI youth and young adults in the US and some of the barriers they experience to mental health care access. I will discuss our project methods and findings on affirmative mental health care. And lastly, I'll discuss some of the strategies for affirmative care and areas for overall improvement in our mental health care system based on our findings from participant lived experiences and their narratives that they shared with us. So since we have a smaller group I'm gonna have us kind of take part in this activity without scanning the QR code. I'll just ask you instead to actually put this in the chat, and we will go ahead and do our activity now rather than later on. So if you can just go ahead and put in the chat what words come to mind when you think about what affirmative mental health care means, I'll go ahead and read out those responses. I'll give you guys moments to do that. All right, so looks like the answers we have are supportive, recognizing humanity, wholeness of human beings, respectful, person-centered, understanding of one's identities. So you will all learn more now if your answers align with what our findings shared, but I'll tell you now they do. Um, so moving on. So to share a little bit of background about mental health in the US among LGBTQ plus young adults and youth, there is a long-standing history of challenges. So 49% of adolescents in the US have a mental health disorder at some point in their lives, but only half ever receive treatment. And as I'm sure many of you know, there's rising rates of depression and anxiety and suicide among young adults and disproportionately among LGBTQ plus youth. So specifically up to 3 times higher. To give a little bit of context on how I got interested in this research and I guess why I'm doing the work I am now. In high school, I really struggled with my mental health, and that was a time when I was starting to understand my queer identity. And at that time, family rejection was a really large part in the role my mental health played. That's also something that we really see in a lot of other LGBTQ plus youth and young adults. Um, Higher levels of family rejection do play a role in higher levels of depression, anxiety, and ultimately suicide. So that is something to keep in mind. Um, so I have a little bit of a graphic for you just to get a visual on this. So the Trevor Project did some research. This is from 2022, and they found that 60% of LGBTQ plus youth reported wanting mental health care, but not getting any because of the following reasons. So the top 3 reasons were fear of discussing mental health concerns, concerns with obtaining parent caregiver permission, and fear of not being taken seriously. As you can see, you can read that the other reasons include lack of affordability, fear of care not working, fear of being outed, fear of their identity being misunderstood, concerns with receiving virtual care at home, lack of transportation options, lack of parent caregiver permission. So a lot of the barriers include both systemic and individual level barriers. And these are very consistent with the findings of our study as well. Another graphic that we have for you all to take in is that 45% of LGBTQ plus youth considered suicide in the past year. So this is from 2020 to 2022. And as you can see, the rates are pretty high and increasing for symptoms of anxiety and increasing for considering suicide. So those are 2 important points to point out here. So I want to share out that affirmative care is an approach to healthcare delivery in which organizations, programs, and providers recognize, validate, and support the identity stated or expressed by the individual served. So when we think about affirmative care, we're often thinking about affirmative physical care rather than affirmative mental care. There is some existing literature and existing resources on physical affirmative care, but quite a lack of affirmative mental health care. So that is the gap we were trying to address here. So it's found to be that LGBTQ plus youth and young adults who have affirming homes, schools, and communities report lower levels of suicide, but there is limited data on affirmative care in the mental health sector, as I mentioned. So one of the last pieces for the overarching picture that I want you all to take with you is that in our nation, only 28% of facilities offer LGBTQ plus specific services. That is a really, really small number compared to the amount of queer identifying youth and young adults that there are. So lack of transportation, barriers to transportation, accessibility to facilities in general that even offer care are just a few of the barriers that go into play when we think about this. So our question that we wanted to answer was, how do LGBTQ plus young adults define affirmative mental health care for themselves? And what do they want from their mental health care providers and encounters? So this is where we go into the study findings, and we're going to go ahead and dive into it a little bit. So for the study methods, this was a qualitative research study conducted in Seattle and Los Angeles in 2023. So for those of you who maybe are a little bit unfamiliar with different research methods, there's both quantitative and qualitative. Qualitative often looks at narratives and storytelling, while quantitative looks at numbers. So we interviewed young adults ages 18 to 26 who identified as LGBTQIA+. Another important factor was that we also offered interviews in both English or Spanish. Unfortunately, we didn't really get any Spanish-speaking participants, but we still did offer that as an option. Interviews lasted for about an hour. They were recorded and transcribed and then coded and analyzed thematically. And most importantly, we used a community-partnered participatory research approach. So I'll go into that a little bit more in a moment. But it's also important to note that reflexivity was used throughout the entire process. So what that means is that researchers considered the ways in which interactions with participants might be influenced by our own professional and personal backgrounds. Reflexivity memos were kept, so that includes after interviews, taking a moment to reflect, taking a moment to assess how anything was being perceived due to personal background and different personal experiences, and making sure that the data was assessed without any personal judgment, essentially. So as I mentioned, we did do a CPPR approach. So what's helpful here is that it really calls out that power dynamic that occurs naturally within research. So what we did was we partnered with the Los Angeles LGBT Center and the Seattle LGBT Center. So I'm guessing most of you are more familiar with the Seattle LGBT Center rather than the LA LGBT Center, but the LA LGBT Center, they have a youth program, and that focuses on the intersection of LGBTQ plus young adults, 18 to 24, that are experiencing homelessness and identify as queer. So that is one of the recruitment sites that we held. And the other one was Seattle LGBT Center, and those ones were conducted remotely. All partners were valued throughout the process, so that includes allowing space for their opinion on different processes, so their opinion on the interview guide, and really any input they had throughout the entire research process. And essentially what this does is this creates a platform for marginalized voices to be heard, and to really create a space for them to be empowered. So what we found that there were 4 different themes we were able to come up with from all of the interviews we conducted. We conducted 29 interviews, and from the multitude of themes and codes, these were the 4. So the first was disconnection from community and self as an impetus for seeking formal mental health care, marginalization during mental health service encounters, the therapeutic power of belonging and mattering in the mental health care system, mutual human connection as the foundation for affirming mental health care experiences. And we have some artwork done, as I mentioned, by the local Seattle artist, Dante. So I'm really excited to have this artwork here that matches and aligns with the themes we have. So for that first theme, this is the artwork that was created. And I'll go ahead and read a quote. So, as I mentioned before, qualitative research really pulls upon narratives and storytelling. So this is one of the interviews I held, and this is one of the quotes from those interviews. So, the guidance counselor told my mother, and then I came home. My mother was like really upset at me. She threw me to the back of the door and she was like, "Well, maybe you should kill yourself." You know, she called me a faggot that day. And so, like, after that, like, I went into a deep, deep, like, silence. Like, and after like 5 years, I wasn't crying. So that is one of the multitude of quotes and stories, snippets of a story that we heard that aligns with this theme. Our next theme was marginalization during mental health service encounters. So again, here's the artwork that aligns with this theme, and the quote I have for you all to sit with is, and I was like leading up to me figuring out, I thought that I was trans and like finding the language for it and finding online like virtual community faces for it. She was actually the first person that I came out to. She also was like, "Are you sure? Think about it. That's a reversible," which is wrong. It's actually reversible. The first person that I told was receiving it in a way that made me feel unworthy of care. Another quote I have that aligns with this theme was from a participant that had to travel from Texas to Louisiana 4 hours to receive therapy just because there was not any affirmative therapists or really any therapist that this person felt comfortable with in Texas. And this is the response they got even traveling that far. And the way like, she would say comments like, "Oh, you're like a very typical traditional case of like FTM, like female to male." Like, would use language that made me like feel like I had to prove myself to be like man enough to like be even able to claim my transness. So I wanted to take a moment to pause here after these definitely difficult snippets of stories and words and share a quote by Brene Brown from her book Braving the Wilderness. Brene shares that not enough of us know how to sit in pain with others. Worse, our discomfort shows up in ways that can hurt people and reinforce their own isolation. I have started to believe that crying with strangers in person could save the world. So I wanted to just share this quote and take a moment to sit with these difficult emotions that might have arose from these snippets of stories, these quotes, these words, and take a moment to really just um, embrace the discomfort of it together as a group. All right, thank you for that. So moving on to the third theme that we found, which was the therapeutic power of belonging and mattering in the mental health care system. So a quote we have, this comes from a participant asked what their ideal mental health care was, and their ideal mental health care was shared to be being able to feel like you matter and your thoughts and feelings matter. It's not about, feeding the things that are bothering you. And we also have this gorgeous illustration really, really pulling on this feeling surrounding belonging and mattering, being seen, being witnessed, being understood, and I think it really shows through in this illustration. So to talk a little bit more about othering and belonging within the mental health care system. So as defined by the Othering and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley, othering is the process of exclusion, marginalization, and structural inequality, while belonging is building a world based on inclusion, fairness, justice, and care for the earth. So, what our participants really expressed is wanting to feel a sense of belonging and ultimately mattering within the mental health care system. and furthermore, a sense of belonging and mattering within essentially client and therapist or client and practitioner interactions. When we move on to practical implications, we can see a few different ways that practitioners and mental health organizations really can curate a sense of belonging and mattering within the overall mental health care system. So, lastly, our fourth theme of mutual human connection as the foundation for affirming mental health care experiences. So, the quote we have is I think people who are, first of all, educated on, ableism and racism and sexism are activists, like will advocate for their clientele. I think this is really important. I think you can be the kindest fucking therapist in the world, but if you're not educated, like on racism, it's like that tells me that you only care about specific clientele. So I want to take a moment to pause here and really highlight that this quote really pulls on the multitude of identities and the intersectional identities that a lot of queer individuals experience. So while it's important that your therapist is maybe educated on one of the many issues, at the end of the day, if they're not educated on the multitude of issues that may be into play, including racism, including ableism, um, at the end of the day, clients can feel the responsibility of having to educate their provider. And that ultimately leads to a feeling of ultimately being devalued, is what we found. Another quote we have to share out about this same theme is this. I feel like what would work best is someone who understands experiences similar to mine because they've like gone through them, like trans therapists, specifically even like a trans mass therapist who understands what it's like being trans mass versus like a therapist. She just has an idea of what it's like to be trans. So one thing we really found was the importance of shared identities among um, clinicians and clients. This was one of the multitude of themes that we boiled down into this overarching theme, and this proved to be really important that many different participants shared out that they really value a sense of shared identity with their provider, and that having a sense of shared identity would lead to a better level of feeling understood and a better level of feeling seen. And I feel like that's really important to highlight here. This was even more true for folks who identified as trans. So as I mentioned, we would discuss practical implications. So what does affirmative mental health care actually look like? So affirmative mental health care looks like a few things based on our findings, based on participant voices themselves. So we came up with the fact that care that is affirming is free of judgment, emphasizes empathy and genuine human connection, alleviates feelings of isolation through shared vulnerability, and addresses the needs of transgender and gender expansive individuals. It's also affirmative for transgender and gender expansive individuals, and it's separate for them, providing them their own um, personalization of care that actually has provider competency, respect towards pronouns, and comfort or willingness to explore gender outside of a gender binary. Another finding we found was that clinicians who desire to provide affirmative mental health care should also self-identify themselves as that, so that can really increase accessibility for potential LGBTQ plus identifying clients. So what that ultimately looks like is ultimately just some symbol, ultimately a pride flag, a sticker of a pride flag, artwork that is queer based, queer empowered. Any visual symbol would be very beneficial and helpful for potential clients. So this is a word cloud, and this is taken from participants' words themselves. And I think something that stands out here is treatment without judgment, and I just want to be a person without all the labels attached. So there's definitely a few other words that are there, but I just want to take a second to really let you all take in a visual of some of the words that our participants shared with us, um, and really let this highlight the sense of shared humanity that clients are really asking for. So, when it comes to recommendations for mental health providers, there's quite a few. So, I will list a few of them. While there are many, um, I'll only list a few. So, introducing yourself and your shared identities, asking for clients' pronouns and preferred name, using clients' pronouns and preferred name in all interactions, and if accidentally misgendering occurs, apologize, affirm, and move on. Avoid centering all mental health conversations around gender or sexuality and allow the client to bring it up if they believe it's relevant. This is extremely important, to not center all conversations around gender or sexuality, and to also really ensure competency on all topics of mental health and well-being related to being queer, including gender, sexuality, trans health, medical transitions, trauma, LGBTQ plus history, and LGBTQ plus history within the healthcare system. So for organizations, on the other hand, some of the practical implications we came up with is offering, requiring, or incentivizing trainings for staff in key areas for developing knowledge and competency in key topics that are salient to the mental health of LGBTQ plus clients, queer gender and sexuality, trans health, medical transitions, trauma, LGBTQ plus history with healthcare. Also, prioritizing a diversity of identities and experiences when hiring providers, include visual symbols of being queer friendly in clinics and offices, providing accessible information about care options and services, and providing community spaces for affirmative care through support groups and education, and ensuring that there are all gender facilities available. This is highly specific to restrooms, making sure that there are spaces available for all genders there. So this is the activity we did earlier. This was going to be a word cloud, but we did it already. So I'll go ahead and move on to our discussion. So I wanted to create some space. If anyone wanted to share any stories or personal experiences, and if not, maybe having a bit of a conversation on how we can advocate overall for curating a sense of belonging within the mental health care system. So if anyone wants to share out in the chat or unmute yourself, feel free to do so. And um, I'll give everyone a few moments if they'd like to participate in that. And the only thing next up we have after that is some time and space for questions. So we can also move on to that if anyone has any questions instead.
I really appreciate the words and the communication here. I don't really have anything kind of amazing to say, but I work at Youth Eastside Services, and I guess we're part of that 28% or whatever, that horribly low number, where we do have LGBTQ plus services specific. And just one thing that always comes to my mind is that, well, I've worked here for 30 some years. And so kind of way back then, and around what you had to say about transportation, we had a drop-in group still going on. And I remember taking calls from youth that lived out in kind of more rural areas on the east side, East King County, and where there wasn't something. Now there are a few more services kind of out there, but there just wasn't anything. And I think just even being able to connect by phone, to hear about something and what it was about and to kind of brainstorm around what might be available, hopefully was kind of affirming in and of itself. And we've just had a lot of situations recently working with parents of youth, and really some of those messages that were there for therapists, I think, might be really important for parents too. I'm thinking particularly that slide you had that was like, if you didn't educate yourself about ableism and racism and sexism and all of these different identities in that, what are you communicating? That you don't care about that? And sort of was just reminding me of a conversation I was having with a clinician about trying to address some things with some parents about, loving and caring for their child and their duty as parents to keep their child alive and sort of, I just wish, we just need to keep spreading these, how important these services are. I mean, particularly in the current climate politically, but it really can save people's lives. I'm rambling. I'm going to stop.
No, I appreciated that. And I think definitely sharing out this information to parents is extremely important. I was actually able to give this presentation or a similar version of it to both parents and clinicians. They were
Well, I like
housed
that.
under the same roof. Yeah. And so sharing this with parents, I felt like, I mean, that is at the end of the day, parents and caregivers are a big portion of who's impacting, their mental health, or their kids' mental health specifically. So I think sharing this information with parents, really engaging parents in these conversations can really, really go a long way. Because if you can feel a sense of belonging within your home, that's going to just give you a higher chance of having better mental health overall.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this makes me think about when you're a child, you depend on your parents for survival, like literally survival. And I think that stays with us. So rejection from your parental figures is a huge thing. And then especially if you don't have affirmations anywhere else, like if you don't find it at school somehow or at a club or online or, with your mental health system somewhere, there needs to be that. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Thank you for sharing about everything you did. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Marisa. I really appreciate the slideshow. Well, very well done. Um,
I'll go ahead and move on. If anyone has any last lingering questions or thoughts, I'll also pull this up in case you're curious for my contact information. It's right here. So yeah, if there are no further questions or thoughts, I will go ahead and
Oh, well, real quick, I will just ask, and I'm so sorry, I've been trying to join the whole time and my audio has been completely off, so I missed a lot of it. I'm really glad it's recorded. Who's Christian Choi? And
so
what should
she
we,
was,
yeah,
oh yeah, sorry, I cut you off. What was the second part of your question?
what would we contact her for, like a specialized versus you, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, so she was the PI on the study. She's still at UCLA, a professor adjunct in nursing and health policy. And so essentially, I guess what you could contact her for, if you're interested in the world of research, I think she's a really great contact point. If there's like further questions specifically about the study. She's also a great point of contact as she's now taking over like the publishing process as I'm no longer at UCLA. In terms of contacting me if you have any questions about really more curiosity about the study itself in terms of participant interviews, methods, I would be a really great point of contact for that, as I conducted the whole study. And I was the one doing the interviews with participants, so I had a really close, really experience with all of this. So I hope that answers the differentiation between the two.
100%. Appreciate it.
Marissa, I had a question for you.
Yeah.
I know one of the big recommendations for organizations was to do like specialized trainings to be able to really better understand people's experiences. Did you guys find any of those trainings yourself that you would recommend, or is that still something like further research would do?
Yeah, that's a good question. It would definitely be further research. I wish there was an actual training that had everything integrated in itself. Um, I would suggest that trainings be curated based off this information as well as other, information out there in the literature. But unfortunately, no trainings created from this. Just the practical implications as a toolkit for utilizing that as a resource to kind of almost create your own methods of how you want to implement this into practice. That would be the next closest thing.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I think there's some really great takeaways that we as NAMI East Side can implement into our own work. And I also, just to touch on kind of like just one thing that I loved that your research really confirmed was that representation really matters in terms of like who is giving care, right? I remember being in my master's of social work program, and so many of my colleagues were queer identifying folks who never saw a therapist who shared their identity, and so now want to be that person for someone else, right? And so I just love that showed up as a really positive thing in your research as well. And I'm really hoping that maybe with the research side of things confirming that we get more like government support and stuff like to really subsidize folks with lots of different diverse identities going and getting the schooling to become a provider, because it's like it is a privilege to have the schooling to be able to do something like that, to be able to provide services for people. So yeah, I'm hoping that that's an outcome of your research, is that we see more support in getting more people to be therapists and to be doctors and things that are queer identifying or are identifying with all different diverse race, ethnicity, all different identifications. So yeah.
Yeah. No, definitely. I agree. That was definitely one of early on in the process of, going through the interviews. That was one of the outcomes I've wanted from day one. And I'm hoping that, just by having more conversations like this, that, we can reach more people. And then on a larger level, definitely hoping that at the end of the day, research is a step towards pushing for government to do something. So yeah, I want those same things too.
That's
Yeah,
awesome. Did you see did you see the question in the chat?
yes. I was just gonna jump to this. Yeah, may you share the slides, the citations? Yes, definitely. For citations, do you mean, would you like an additional reference sheet for that, or just wanting to confirm the second part of the question?
No.
And if it's helpful, okay.
Sorry, Alec. I was just going to
No,
say,
you first.
I just meant, we would keep them intact, giving credit to you and your study and to Dr. Choi, and that's all I meant.
Okay. Yeah, no, definitely. That sounds good. And then, Alec, yeah, I can share. I
Yeah,
have like,
actually, Marissa, if it's easier for you, I usually do an email out after these forums just to send everybody the recording and also our feedback survey, which I will include in a link right here as well. So if it's easier for you, I'm happy to send the PDF of your slides that you sent to me out to everybody after the forum's over.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. That sounds really
Perfect.
good. That would be
Then
helpful.
yes, Christy, you can look out for an email from me with those slides included.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, so just to plug the survey that I put in the chat one more time. This is our demographic survey. This is for NAMI East Side's, just we're collecting who's coming to our programs and what can we do to improve the programs. What are we doing well, what are we not doing well, and how to just make programming better for everybody. So if you have the time to fill out our demographic survey, it would be much appreciated. We still have time for questions too, if there are more questions.
I had a question. Can you see me?
Yeah.
In one of your first slides, you mentioned that about 49% of people who identify as LGBTQIA+ are diagnosed with a mental illness.
Mhm.
Is that what it said? I think that's what it said.
Yeah, and I can jump back to that slide just so we can have it up for us. It's definitely early on right there. Let's see, or I think it was earlier on.
Well, it's okay.
Yeah. Here's this one that shares 45% of LGBTQ plus youth considered suicide in the past year. And in terms of facilities offering affirmative care, only 28% offer LGBTQ plus specific.
I think it was before that one. And oh, maybe not.
Sorry, that one jumped around.
Well, I just was.
There's another one here for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's ask your question.
I saw a film a number of years ago. I don't remember what it was called. Probably you're familiar with it, about a person who had I think it was one of the first transgender operations. It was a feature film. Do you remember the name of it? I don't know.
I'm trying to remember the name. Danish Girl, I think.
Yeah, I think it was the Danish Girl. And I know historically, I know in psychiatry historically that being LGBTQIA was considered a psychiatric abnormality. And I was wondering so when I see that almost 50% of people that are LGBTQIA, I'm just wondering if you can make any historical comment about how psychiatry historically treats people in that group.
Yeah, so like you said, it was actually taken off the DSM in 1973. So up until then, identifying as queer, mostly, I would say identifying as gay was the more widely known term. So identifying as homosexual at that point is what typically was referred to, was taken off the DSM 1973 at that point. And so I think the connection there is that there's been a lot of stigma surrounding identifying as queer, gay, trans, bisexual in our society. And with that stigma carries a lot of weight of othering. There's a lot of weight in individual interaction. So not only within families based on, different cultures, different religions, but also as a society at, a system level, overseeing, schools and different places of community that really don't create a space of welcoming and a space of acceptance to different identities. I think that stigma itself is just one of the many things that contributes to that higher level, that you see about almost 50% of LGBTQ plus folks struggling with some type of mental health struggle, whether that be anxiety or depression. So I would say like that stigma alone is something that highly contributes among a variety of multiple other factors.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know there's a lot of historical stigma.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if we don't have any last questions, I will go ahead and stop sharing. And then Edie, I know you have my slides, so you can share those out to anyone. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Marisa, for joining us tonight. I'm so happy that we were able to connect and that you're able to share this awesome research that I feel like I've been hearing just from friends and colleagues for years, and now to have it in evidence-based terms is really, really revolutionary. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for the work that you've done, and I'm really looking forward to hopefully seeing some really great progress from this.
Yeah.
But yeah, if there are no last questions, anybody have any last things to? Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Really, really appreciate you being here. This is a monthly educational forum, so we do come back every fourth Tuesday of the month at the same time, with a different educational topic around mental health. This is also a space sponsored by Evergreen Health, so thanks so much to them for allowing us to have this educational space. Yeah, hope to see you at more of our programs, more of our forums. But otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and happy Pride.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks.